Hello and welcome to this edition of the Neoliberal Project Quarantine Stream. Almost going 2 years strong. That is a depressing statement. Um, but anyway, thank you all who joined us for the event tonight. I'm super excited. I love doing these streams when we can get actual members of Congress that come on Twitch to talk to us. But I also think tonight's going to be a fun topic. Chatting about the economy, chatting about trade, and just chatting about supply chains generally. And I think Derek Kilmer is a perfect guest to talk about this, considering he represents a ton of ports in his district. But we'll get into his biography once he joins. Jeremiah, hello. How do we turn off those notifications? They're off now. This is why we start 15 minutes early, so I have 15 minutes to get rid of all the bugs before I bring a member of Congress onto the stream. I also get to test all the other stuff when I have like the little stream starting window right there. It's wonderful. But yeah, hopefully you're going to get a good turnout tonight. I always love to brag when we can get a huge turnout for these events because like members of Congress who are giving us their time deserve a good turnout for one of these. In this world famous Jeremiah, oh, what? You tried with that one. I know Jeremiah is a bullfrog, but I don't know if you necessarily want to put it between the Jerem and the Aya. But how's everyone doing? I'm sure we have a lot of Twitch regulars in the chat tonight. It's been a while since I've seen you because I have not streamed since early August, when we had Representative Jim Himes on the stream to talk about cybersecurity. Jeremiah was a bullfrog, indeed, and everyone's a critic. But today's event going to be the normal format. We'll bring him on. Let the Representative Derek Kilmer give an introduction about who he is, what he does, all that fun stuff. I have some prepared questions for him about the economy, his voting record, supply chain shenanigans, all of that. But as always, we will leave the last 15 minutes of the event for questions from the audience. So I will be looking at chat to see what wonderful questions you all put up. And yeah, just go from there, basically. 10 minutes. Oh, wait, did I tweet that from the wrong account? I think I tweeted that from the wrong account. Oh, didn't mean to do that. So I scheduled some tweets to promote this event, obviously. But I accidentally tweeted from my personal account, which isn't the end of the world, I guess. But that's... I don't have as many followers as the main account, so like it's significantly less cool. Let me find me, and then we'll get this started. I also always forget that we stream this on Twitter. So for those who are joining us on Twitter and YouTube and Facebook, I don't know if we're streaming on Facebook, but if you're watching on Facebook, thank you. Thanks for joining us. If you want to participate in chat and ask questions, you do have to be on Twitch though. So, like, hop on Twitch and do that. I think you can, like, sign up with an Amazon account, and who doesn't have an Amazon account at this point? So, like, come through. What's up, Jeremy? How's it going? Wasn't Himes in July? Himes was, maybe it was July. I could be wrong. I thought it might have been, like, the first day in August. But I could be wrong. The sound alerts are off. They are off because we have a representative coming on. So we don't do sound alerts when representatives come on. When is Jeremiah's fishing stream happening? He said anything about that? I haven't heard about that, but he should definitely do that. Can the congressman see the chat? That's up to him. I mean, like, if he wants to look at chat, he's allowed to look at chat. But, like, I'll ask the questions from the chat so they can be slightly filtered in case we get some trolls joining us tonight. Can we spam correct at Congressman Kilmer? Yes, you can. Everything that you spam that's positive is really, really good. One of the best moments when we had Scott Peters on in April was when people were saying poggers to him after he talked about how like he was a Yimby. And that was amazing, and people should do that. So if Derek Kilmer does something that's poggers, you should tell him it's poggers. Just putting it out there. Play the taco song for a member of the House. Absolutely not. um, I because like we also record these and like we post them and we like to send clips around and all that, and like I don't want to be the person to explain to a member of Congress or his staff to be like, so this is yeah, so I need you to understand the taco song. This was intentional, and one of our members paid money to do this. So we're not going to do that. Nor am I opening any YouTube links during this stream, Michael. Hey, Kevin, how's it going? Great that you could join us. Ashen, wonderful. Can you ask him for an excuse to family Christmas stuff? Omicron. Omicron is a very good excuse for all this family Christmas stuff. I don't think you need a member of Congress to tell you that one. Not opening the link before he comes. See, like, I have to dip in probably... No, I'm not. Michael, okay, look, if you stay for the entire event, I will play the seal video after. I don't want to play it during it, and I don't want to play it before because I have like all my settings set up to like immediately switch to Derek Kilmer once he joins. But afterwards, I'll play the seal video. I promise. And enable emotes. They should be working. I don't know. I mean, if they're not working, then I can't tell you why that's happening. Colin watched the 59-part Chris Chan documentary on YouTube on stream with Derek. Anyway, I'm going to pretend I didn't see that one. There's a 59-part documentary on him. This stream is not sponsored by Lacroix, but I will periodically be sipping on Lacroix during the stream as well because I'm addicted to this stuff. Best Lacroix flavor? I mean, they all kind of taste the same. Like, Lacroix's kind of a scam in that regard. Like, I just kind of like the carbonation. But, like, my go-to one is the cherry lemon in the tall cans, which you really can't find in stores anymore. But, like, I know, like, food and beverage distributors will still carry it, or they have, like, stockpile of it. Or maybe it does exist in stores. I just haven't seen it in, like, Target or any of the places where I typically buy LaCroix. Colin does the good tweets. Jeremiah does the bad tweets. Correct. Colin gets his specially imported dodging tariffs. Is LaCroix imported? No, it's California. It's California. We only drink American on this stream. All right. So 5 minutes till start. I'm going to dip in like 3 minutes to help set up the Zoom with Representative Kilmer, but like you'll just get like the I'll be back screen, and then I'll actually come back with our guest tonight. But 330 people coming out tonight. Thank you so much. This is awesome. Colin gets his tweets imported. No, they are all my bad takes are made in house. Aha is better. Never had Aha. Never heard of Spindrift either. Even Target Seltzer is better than LaCroix. I don't know about that. Every time I buy anything that's like Target brand, it's usually pretty awful. So I'm gonna mark that claim as suspicious. Wait, quick, like audience audio check. Like this sounds good. This microphone, I'm coming in not too loud, not too low. Audio quality is good. Cool. All right. Well, I just got a notification that Representative Kilmer joined the Zoom meeting, so I'm going to hop on that early because if we can get him on a few minutes early, the more time the merrier. So enjoy this BRB screen for the next few minutes. Representative Kilmer, or Derek, as you told me I should call you. Thanks for joining the stream. You are at zero fault for the fact that this got blown up by votes last week, but it's great that we are able to do it exactly a week later when everyone's schedules are much better.
I appreciate you understanding, and I hope those watching understand too. So thank you.
I would almost be more concerned if you gave up voting on the House floor to join us on the Twitch stream rather than the other way around.
Fair
So
point.
this is
Fair
this
point.
is a much better arrangement.
Appreciate it.
So can you just give for the viewers who may not be familiar with you, just like a quick overview of who you are, what district you represent, and what issues that you are really passionate about?
Yeah. I grew up in my district. I represent Washington State's 6th district, which basically goes from Tacoma west and includes the Olympic Peninsula. I grew up in a logging town on the coast of Washington State. My folks were school teachers. And I was in high school right around the time the timber industry sort of took it on the chin. And I saw a bunch of my friends' parents lose their jobs and a bunch of my neighbors lose their jobs. And that really altered the trajectory of my adult life. I went off to Princeton for undergrad and studied public policy. My senior thesis in college was how do you help timber towns in Washington State? And then did the same thing in graduate school. I got a Marshall Scholarship and was at Oxford and did a social policy PhD. And I looked at mining towns in the UK and timber towns in the Pacific Northwest, really trying to get my head around how do we foster more sustainable communities. And came back home. I worked for McKinsey and Company for a few years, mostly to try to get out of student debt, largely unsuccessfully, by the way. And then went to go work in economic development in my region and was working, trying to bring more jobs to our area and tried to keep the ones we had. And never thought I'd run for office. I just kind of got grumpy. I kept finding myself saying, gosh, you know what government does and doesn't do sure impacts our ability to grow jobs. And finally, some of my friends said, you know, you seem to have a lot of good ideas and you sure complain a lot. Why don't you go do something about it, pal? And the next thing I knew, I was serving in the Washington State Legislature. And then in 2012, I ran for Congress. And in Congress, you know, probably not surprising based on that windup, I focus a lot on economic issues, trying to create more economic opportunity for more people in more places. In fact, in the Buildback Better bill, there's a provision that I worked on to try to help persistently distressed communities like some of the ones I represent and one of the ones I come from. So work a lot on issues related to economic development and workforce development. I'm an appropriator. I serve on the Appropriations Committee, on the subcommittee for interior and environment. So I work a lot on environmental issues. You know, the district I represent has Puget Sound, which is glorious. We have salmon and orca issues, trying to recover those vitally important species. I represent 11 Native American tribes, so we work a lot on those issues as well. I serve on the Defense Subcommittee. The largest employer in my district is Naval Base Kitsap, Puget Sound Naval Shipyard. So the Navy is the largest employer in my district. So we work a lot on those sort of national security and defense issues. And then I serve on the Subcommittee of Energy and Water. And so a lot of the climate issues come through that subcommittee. Then finally, well, I guess penultimately, I was asked to chair a new committee in Congress called the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress, which makes it sound like we're the IT help desk. We're not. We're a committee that about every 20 or 30 years or so, Congress realizes things aren't working the way they ought to. And they create a committee to look at how to make Congress work better for the American people. And so I chair that committee, which is a really interesting committee. And if folks want to ask about it, I'm happy to take questions about that. I guess finally, one of the areas where I've invested a lot of my time and energies is in the New Democrat Coalition. In the last Congress, I was the chair of the coalition. This Congress, I'm the chair emeritus. As I understand it, emeritus is Latin for irrelevant. But I've still remained very involved with the coalition because I think it's got a pragmatic approach to trying to grow the economy, help people, make government work better. And that's really what I'm focused on, is trying to make the economy and Congress work better for the people I represent.
I think every single member who's joined us on this stream has been a New Dem, so you're carrying on a long tradition wonderful members of Congress who have joined us. But you are our first
Well, I'll
chair,
try
or
not to
former
screw it
chair
up
for
in
that
the hour
matter.
we have together. So I'll do my best not to mess anything up.
Because I know we are going to be talking about economics, trade, and supply chains, issues
Sure.
that I know you work very closely on because, as far as I understand, you represent around like 20 ports in your district?
Yeah, 19 ports.
Wow. Um, so just tell me, like, give me a 50,000 foot overview of what your impression has been of just the state of trade and supply chains in your district, and also from a national perspective as well.
Yeah. Well, we've definitely seen some of the issues around supply chain impact Washington ports firsthand. The container dwell times, the amount of time a container stays at a marine terminal after it's unloaded from an ocean carrier and taken off the premises by a truck. You know, those have uh, uh, increased at the ports on the West Coast over the past year, and so have on dock rail dwell times. So I've definitely heard from a number of folks that have faced challenges over the past few months. In fact, I literally just today called a small business in my district that is struggling with that. I basically made a commitment at the beginning of COVID that if someone reached out to my office having lost a job or lost a business or lost a loved one due to the pandemic, that I'd call them. And so thankfully, this wasn't a business that has gone out of business, but they're really struggling to
Hmm.
get supplies, and it's really hurt their sales. So we've heard from a number of unique small businesses that have some specific types of products that have seen delays in different pieces and parts. A distillery that wasn't get the consistent flow of tops to go on their bottles when they were needed. Certainly some of our local car dealers who have much smaller inventory than usual, in part due to the microchip delays. And obviously that's something that Congress hopefully will take action on soon. In few local school districts that were dealing with limited lunch options for a short time because of shipments of things like plastic and brown paper bags and
Oh, wow.
boxes. So the good news is, though, that it appears that some of the key indicators are starting to trend back in the right direction. Some of the problematic issues are easing. And hopefully we'll see, both with regard to supply chain issues and more broadly, which with regard to inflation, we'll start to see some improvement. The Seattle Times last week had a report looking at the issues related to the Northwest Seaport Alliance, which is our big kind of mega port, which is the Seattle and Tacoma port, that the number of vessels at anchor in our region has dropped from a high of about 15 per day to about 7.
Hmm.
And that's traced to smoother rail operations that are allowing containers to be moved off of marine terminals more quickly, improving some of the scheduling by shipping companies. So, you're starting to see some progress there. In fact, you've also seen some of the terminal operators institute some long dwell fees to incent faster container pickups. So, and then you asked about nationwide. The president announced that that we're seeing similar results in some of the nation's biggest ports. The number of containers sitting on docks is down by about 40% over last month. So that's progress. I think it's good news that the Biden administration um, has paid this some attention. That you're seeing um, active engagement, dealing with these issues. And listen, that's not just Eric Kilmer saying that. The fact that you've now seen the CEOs of Walmart and UPS and FedEx and Target all say that they don't have the shortages that they were really worried about, heading into the Christmas holiday. I think that's good news. And I think that's because you've seen attention paid by the Biden administration, the Port Action Plan, focused on easing up the bottlenecks. I think that's good news. There was a lot at play here, and the pandemic is part of it. You saw a big drop in demand over the course of the pandemic. And then you saw things ratchet up real quickly, and now manufacturers are picking up the pace. I think hopefully we'll get to a new equilibrium and see things continue to trend in the right direction.
So you touched on this, but I'm curious for you to dive a little bit deeper into What do you think are the specific root causes of the supply chain issues that the nation is facing? Is it a demand issue? Is it a trade issue? I'm sure it's a little bit of both, but like, what do you see are being the primary reasons that we're facing these challenges?
I wish I could say it's this one thing, right? I think there's the challenges that we faced. There's a complex set and to some degree a novel set of factors. The the COVID-19 pandemic triggered a lot of significant changes in consumer spending. Um, People were stuck at home, so a lot of the um, you saw a shift from services to goods. People were um, sitting at home buying a bunch of stuff on Amazon, for example. The Kilmer family was part of that, and at the same time, factories were shut down, and some of the transportation workforce was also initially diminished. So, um, we have historically in this country a very um, efficient processes kind of at every stage of the supply chain with not a lot of extra capacity. Um, and what that meant was when there was disruption, it really threw things out of whack.
Hmm.
On top of that, you have labor and equipment shortages, and new global trade and travel constraints that, again, were tied to the pandemic that caused record breaking container volumes and container dwell times. And then finally, you had warehouse vacancy rates at an all-time low, which has prolonged container and truck chassis dwell times outside the terminal. And so all of these factors really worked in tandem, all requiring different responses to fix the broader problem. And both the private sector and the federal government have roles to play in addressing some of these root causes. And I think you're seeing action that, again, I am hopeful means we're through the worst of this, and hopefully going to see some continued improvement as things continue to pass.
Yeah, because I remember back in like September and October when this was first coming to prominence within the discourse and media and all that people are saying like buy your Christmas gifts now because there's not going to be Christmas gifts in December, and
Yeah.
the worst of that never came to fruition. And while there were challenges that people faced, and there's still continuing challenges with very specific products, we never really reached that moment where people are like, oh, wow, I have nothing to buy for Christmas because we're not getting shipments from China. We're not getting shipments from these other countries, yada, yada, yada. Like, it is really impressive how well the federal government, President Biden, and the private sector have all kind of come together and figured out how to fix 99% of this. And it really feels like we're coming on to the other side of this right now.
I think I both think that's right, and I certainly hope that's right. As you were talking, was trying to find wood that I could knock on. Um, but listen, earlier this year you saw the Biden administration issue an executive order on supply chains and convene a supply chain task force, really to help support and improve America's supply chain. You I think that has been helpful to see that type of attention paid to it. You've seen committees in the House and in the Senate that have just jurisdiction over these issues, have hearings on supply chain issues. Even just last week, you saw in Senate Commerce hearings on this. For what it's worth, I think over the long haul, the fact that you saw the infrastructure bill passed into law, that's going to be helpful because it has substantial investments in our ports, at both our water ports and our airport infrastructure. You're going to see substantial investments in freight mobility, in rail infrastructure. And I think those are things that, as we look at the need for intermodal freight improvements, that's going to be very, very helpful over the long haul. That doesn't happen overnight, right? Mm-hmm. So some of these issues, as we think about the long term, you've seen the Biden administration and Congress engage both on short-term issues and start to lay the foundation for some improvements over the long haul too.
You stole the next question out of my mouth, which was going to be how the infrastructure bill and the Buildback Better Act are going to address these supply chain issues. The infrastructure bill is an obvious one. There's direct investments in ports and infrastructure that hopefully facilitate better transportation in this country and global trade as well. But how do you think like the Build Back Better Act is going to help address the supply chain issues?
Well, the most important piece of the Build Back Better Act is just recognizing that people are feeling pain right now, right? The supply chain issues and more broadly the issues related to inflation mean that people are feeling pinched economically. And the good news is you've seen the Biden administration and Democrats in Congress have a plan for that to reduce prices for people. Um, reducing the price of childcare, reducing the price of healthcare, reducing the price for families that may be struggling to pay for college or who want to get job training. Uh, you know, reducing energy prices through some of these investments in clean energy in the clean energy sector. All of those things. Reducing housing costs. Each one of those things addresses a pain point for our constituents that are made more painful as a consequence of uh, of inflation and of the pandemic. I think it's important to think about where we were just a year ago. Come into my time machine and think about where we were in December of 2020. The headlines in December of 2020 were about a record amount of demand at our local food banks. They were about increases in hunger, in housing instability, in families struggling to pay the rent. And what you've seen over the course of the last year has been an attempt to address that, right? You saw investments through the American Rescue Plan to address those pain points felt by our constituents. The Build Back Better Act is basically trying to get a handle on further reducing some of the prices that our constituents are feeling. Now, listen, there are other pieces of this that I think, as we think about long-term inflation, could be helpful. And in fact, Mark Zandi came out with an analysis saying that it would both that the Build Back Better Act would both increase economic growth and ease inflation. The inflation piece of this, I kind of spoke more to what it meant for our constituents than what it means for inflation. Is if you look at some of the factors that are driving inflation, one, labor force participation has increased some of the labor costs. When you make investments in childcare, when you expand the earned income tax credit, it means that people can join the labor force. When you make investments, as the Build Back Better does, in workforce development, that means you're increasing worker productivity. And that also, I think, will be valuable as we look at sort of the long-term issues, both with regard to supply chain and with regard to inflation.
That's good to hear. Because I mean, you're definitely aware of the debate that's gone back and forth on whether Build Back Better is going to address inflation and what direction it will address inflation. So it's good to hear from you that like your thinking is along the lines of it's going to ease inflation by addressing the labor market concerns that have contributed to inflation. I guess,
and that's not just Derek Kilmer saying that. That's economists, right? You've seen
yeah.
multiple Nobel Prize winning economists. You've seen folks like Moody's Analytics say that the president's agenda and the work that's being done in Congress would both spur economic growth and ease inflation. I can't help but think about the sign that was up in the econ department when I was in college. There was a sign on the wall of the econ department that said there are three kinds of economists: those that can count and those that can't. So I recognize that there may be, varying perspectives on this. What I think about is what this means for my constituents. And my constituents, particularly in light of the pain of the pandemic, and the fact that a lot of them were feeling pain even before any of us had heard of COVID-19, my constituents need a break. Mm-hmm. And they need to see some reduction in some of these costs that they're facing in housing, in childcare, in healthcare. And for what it's worth, I represent a district that has a lot of communities that have struggled for a long time. And so I introduced a bill called the Recompete Act, which is in Build Back Better as a pilot, but that's focused on providing some long-term flexible support to communities that have faced persistent economic distress. I think that's a pretty big deal too.
When looking at the programs that are in Build Back Better, there's a lot of them that are set to expire after a set period of time. Do you
Yeah.
have concerns over some of the programs not being renewed for to make permanent? And if so, like, how do you think that we should fund the programs to make them permanent?
Well, so the New Democrat Coalition, really from the beginning of the discussions on Build Back Better, said, one, we agree with these priorities, but that it would be valuable to do fewer things better and longer term. In part because, if you look at, for example, the healthcare provisions, um, I don't say this in a partisan way. It's just a statement of fact. Like, the Republicans in Congress have not blushed for a second about letting healthcare provisions expire. They were trying to repeal them. And so, similarly, the child tax credit, right? You have not, unfortunately, seen the type of bipartisan support for the expansion and refundability of the child tax credit. I think we should make that permanent. As it stands, it's slated to expire. And, you saw when that was expanded as part of the American Rescue Plan, the economic analysis tells us that the provisions related to the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit are expected to cut child poverty in our country somewhere between 40 and 50% this year.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really big deal. And so, again, I would be reticent to see those policies sort of at the mercy of whatever parties in control in Congress. So my predisposition is to do more things long term. In the end, the decisions that were made were to basically see what sort of offsets could be agreed to, and then to try to right size it. So, you've got most of these programs that are on a 6-year time frame. Not all of them. There's varying time frames within the Build Back Better Act. I do think that you've seen generally agreement on some of the pay-fors. My constituents are bullish about the fact that nobody who's making under $400,000 is going to see an increase in their taxes. You've seen most of this fall on asking large corporations and those making more than $400,000, and primarily those making more than $10 million, asking those folks to pay more. My constituents are supportive of that. I think you've seen Democrats in the House supportive of that. I think we will likely see support for that from Democrats in the Senate. Just to give you a statistic, there are 30,000 people in this country who earn more than $10 million. Good for them. In contrast, there are 121,000 kids just in my district who will benefit from the expansion of the child tax credit. And so if you look at what this means for our constituents in each of our districts, I think far and away the benefits are significant. And, that's, my hope is we are able to get this across the finish line, get this passed, see our constituents start to benefit from it, and be able to spend some time rather than, as unfortunately has been sort of the obsession of the press, has been the process stories of the day-to-day negotiations and sometimes the minute-by-minute negotiations on this. I'd like to be able to talk about what's in the bill, not just the negotiations on the bill.
No, definitely. And I mean, especially the child tax credit stuff, which is such a popular policy amongst our members. It really is great to hear, especially the New Dems, really in unison, just parroting how great the child tax credit is and how important it is to make it permanent, and really leading the charge in many respects of how this needs to be an integral part of the Build Back Better Act, especially if things get cut down.
Listen, I have and it's funny, it's not to shift hats, but I mentioned I chair this committee focused on trying to make Congress work better. And we've had a series of hearings and discussions related to evidence-based policymaking. And if you believe in evidence and you believe in fact, you should believe in the child tax credit because it is a wildly successful public policy that most other advanced nations have as a tool for poverty reduction. In the United States, the fact that this was part of the American Rescue Plan was a great success. It would be a shame to see it expire.
And I mean, if you look at the econ literature, Like the long run effects of child poverty are just so stark. It affects future
Sure.
health outcomes, future educational outcomes, future income outcomes. Like it's just so terrible. And the fact that we have a policy that will reduce it by 50% is remarkable and could be one of
Yeah.
the biggest achievements by a Democratic administration in decades if it gets passed. So I'm really hoping that it stays in, it becomes permanent. I guess one of my follow-up questions is, do you think that there'll be any short-term action on the child tax credit if Buildback Better Act is not passed by January?
Not based on what Speaker Pelosi said today.
Hmm. So you think that if the child tax credit is going to be extended,
Her,
it'll be a
her,
part of Build
her
Back Better?
that is what she said today.
All right. Well, crossing my fingers that Build Back Better can get over the finish line.
I
Um,
hope so too. I hope so
and
too.
and I think once it gets passed, it'll be much easier to parrot and champion the real achievements that are in the bill. So I can't wait for that moment that we can start singing the praises rather than paying attention to the procedural drama, which I think everyone is
Yeah.
tired of at this point.
The breathless coverage of the Senate parliamentarian. Who knew that
Oh
this
my
was going to
God.
be how we spent 2021?
You know something is wrong with our country if more than 1% of the population knows who the Senate parliamentarian is. And I think it's the case that more than 1% of the population knows that this person even exists.
I, I fear you may be right.
Um, so we've been talking about supply chains, we've been talking about economics and economic policy. I kind of want to shift a little bit in the vein of supply chains to talk about trade. Um, so you voted for TPA, which was the precursor to what many people know as the Trans-Pacific Partnership. What is your broad view on trade policy, especially coming from a district that has so many ports in it?
Yeah. Well, listen, I come from a state that's the most trade dependent state in the country, and a region that generally benefits from trade. We do pretty well when we sell, Boeing airplanes, Microsoft software, delicious almond roca made in Washington's 6th congressional district, apples and cherries and wood products all over the world. Um, so we benefit from that broadly. And so trade is a big deal for where I'm from, and I'm a big believer that trade is going to happen, but it needs to happen by the rules. And the question that we face as a country is, are those rules set with the United States at the table, or do we allow them to be set by China? Or do we have trade with no rules where some of the priorities that I hold near and dear and that my constituents hold near and dear around protection of workers and protection of the environment and protection of things like international intellectual property, do we see sort of violations of those values and those priorities? And so, I think I want to see trade happen in a way that helps us export American products and not American jobs. And I think it is vitally important that the United States is at the table in setting those rules of the road. And again, like, I come to this as someone who spent my professional life working in economic development, but also coming from a community that was hit hard when jobs went away. And I think it's really important to make sure that we don't leave workers behind, that we don't leave communities behind, which is also part of the reason, for what it's worth, that I've been a big advocate, not just of having the United States be engaged on trade policy, but also making sure that we expand things like trade adjustment assistance so that we're not leaving communities behind that may have been hit hard by trade when we didn't have adequate rules in place.
On the vein of trade policy, and I guess this even gets back to the issue of inflation. It's estimated that the tariffs that the Trump administration put in place ended up costing families about $2,000 a year, and increased costs for appliances and input goods.
Yeah.
Do you think that repealing these tariffs or relieving some of these tariffs could help ameliorate the inflationary pressures Americans have been facing over the past couple of months?
Yeah. The short answer is yes. We have not benefited. In fact, certainly we have not seen either the benefit in terms of domestic jobs, nor have we seen any sort of benefit to consumers. But the problem is people don't know it. Um, I almost feel like, every time you go buy something at the mall or on Amazon, your receipt should also say, and oh, by the way, this is part of, here's a line item for what you're paying because of Trump administration trade policies.
I love that.
Maybe that would change the tenor of some of the discussion on trade because, frankly, there is a disconnect. There's a disconnect, for policymakers, but there's also a disconnect for our constituents. I represent a district that benefits from trade. And yet, you had Donald Trump spending 4 years, and running for office back in 2016, saying, if you're hurting economically, it's because of, from his perspective, because of immigrants and because of his words, loser trade deals. And I think that's just so wrong-headed. His diagnosis is wrong, and as a consequence, his policy prescription was wrong. But I'm not sure I'm not sure we've done a good job of telling that story. I've talked to even when the Trade Promotion Authority discussion was underway, I would talk to some of the employers in my region who would call with me pleading, saying, please, pass this, and they'd say all the jobs in my plant are associated with being able to, export our products. And I would always say, do your workers know that? Because I don't think they did. And I think it's why you saw such a toxic conversation related to trade when that discussion came up. And I think we've got to do better.
Do you think there's any potential for trade action in the next couple of years, or do you think it's really become a moot point?
Oh, I think, thankfully, I think you're seeing the Biden administration sort of reset the trade discussions and get back to, what serves the interest of American workers, what makes it so that we can export American products, how do we make sure we're benefiting American consumers, and how do we have that happen in a way that's high standards, that protects workers, that protects the environment, and that protects intellectual property. I think if anybody is going to be able to lead kind of a reset, the discussion around trade, it's the president from Scranton.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely been someone who's been more attuned to trade policy than at least the past administration, where it seemed like it was a more reactive, nationalistic symbol of something that really wasn't related to economic policy or the welfare of Americans and American workers.
And it didn't help American workers, and it didn't help American consumers.
But I just want to say again how much I love your idea of telling Americans directly how much tariffs are costing them, whether it's on a receipt or an invoice. Not sure how we
At the
make that
very
happen,
least,
but
like and for what it's worth, I mean, I've talked to. I won't say who. I talked to one of the manufacturers in the district I represent, where like 70% of um, their revenue comes from global sales, from trade.
mm-hmm.
And I've said to him, put it on the pay stub when you pay your employees. How much of the revenues coming into your company are a consequence of global trade, because they need to know that their jobs are tied to global trade. And I don't think a good enough job has been done. And listen, it's hard because I think about, if you go back to the TPA discussion, when I would get asked about my support for President Obama's trade policy at a town hall meeting, it took me usually about 10 minutes to talk about it. And that doesn't, and I'd kind of run through, here's my lay of the land. That does not compete with the bumper sticker that says stop loser trade deals, right? It just doesn't compete. So, we've got to figure out how to tell the story better. And that falls on me and on others who believe that we should have a smart trade policy that protects workers, that protects our environment, and that grows jobs.
I completely agree. And I think especially now that we're seeing the rising prices on Americans, it's the easiest, quickest way to relieve the pressure valve on that is to give people tariff relief, because if we know that Americans are facing huge financial burdens because of it, congressional action takes longer. You have to go through a few hundred people to get a bill, and then for the president to sign it. But the president has the authority to do tariff relief now. So hopefully we see some action on that, and some long-term reforms as well. It's been good to see that the Biden administration is definitely making an effort to having constructive trade conversations, as opposed to the rhetoric we saw during the Trump administration.
I agree.
So I have one more question, but I want to tell people who are in the chat and who are watching to please drop any questions you have for Derek here. We'll be doing that in a couple of minutes. So you're clearly a Star Wars fan based on the poster I see in the background. I think I saw like a Boba Fett little head behind you earlier.
Yeah.
Do you have any feelings on the fact that the prequel movies were started off by a trade dispute?
Well, I don't like that, honestly. I don't know about you, but I feel like when I saw the first Star Wars movies and the scroll kind of went down, you were like, I'm in, I'm locked in. Yeah, Princess Leia standing up against the bad guys and all that stuff. And I feel like when episode 1 came out and it was like, we're in the midst of a complex trade dispute, and you're like, wait a minute, what? So not as a policymaker, but as a Star Wars fan, and according to the Washington Post, as the biggest Star Wars nerd in Congress, I definitely feel like that maybe missed the mark.
It is a testament to fewer trade disputes means more global peace.
There you go. If
we're going to take one thing from those movies, it should be that.
None of this would have happened if we had just had smarter trade policy. We could have avoided the entire dark side thing. I'm telling you, that's what's at stake here.
So someone did ask, and I don't know if you can see him from here, but maybe know him offhand. What are the books that you have on the coffee table in the background?
I have kind of a random assortment of Doris Kearns Goodwin, John Meacham, The Soul of America. I got a book so when I was at Oxford, Gary Hart was a visiting fellow, and he gave me a book called The Patriot. So I have a book on that. And I have Jared Cohen's book, Accidental Presidents, which I think I put that up when we started getting on Zoom back in the Trump presidency.
It's always one of my favorite questions, just to ask, like, what books do you have in the background? Because like it's usually an intentional choice to put those back there, especially in the Zoom pandemic era. I remember when it was the running joke that everyone had the power broker in the background, and any CNN interview you watched, you'd see the power broker at some portion of the interview really in someone's bookcase.
Well, I don't use this as my Zoom background when I've gone on TV or on cable. I have a big bookshelf, and I do have Robert Caro books, but I don't have the power broker on there. So that's a good pro tip. I also have a lot of like plants hanging down, and I've really tried to, I've tried to raise my room rater score. So,
what did you get a score when you were on TV?
In fact, I went on Fox News last month, and I was a 9 out of 10. They liked my background, and they thought I had to work on my lighting.
I mean, 9 out of 10 is pretty good.
I'll take.
I can't complain with that.
Yeah.
So
I've got some great Star Wars stuff in my background on my bookshelf. So it's.
Oh, so when you do your Fox News hits, those are up there as well?
I have a Yoda that is like using the Force to hold up books, and I have a Boba Fett helmet, like a full size Boba Fett helmet. Wow. Yeah, we're not messing around.
I imagine most of the viewer comments following your interview probably had less to do with the substance of what you said and more about the fact that you had the Boba Fett helmet in the background.
I feel like these are the hard-hitting questions that people tuned in to hear us talk about today.
We're not on cable TV, so we can have these kinds of casual conversations that are a bit more fun. I mean, it started with trade policy, so that's what matters.
Yeah, there you go. We're good.
But now I have a serious question from someone in the chat who asks, what does Congressman Kilmer think about the U.S. support for Taiwan and involvement in East Asia generally?
I support the Biden administration's approach on this. I think, I just took a trip to that region, and there's to some degree, China's kind of doing our work for us with other countries in that region. They've been, because of their um, aggressions, uh, a consistent theme as I visited some of those countries in the neighborhood was we're concerned about China. They want the United States to play a strong leadership role in the region. Um, and I think the engagement that you've seen from the Biden administration is such a contrast than from what you've seen
Hmm.
what you saw from the Trump administration. That has been very much appreciated by the other countries in the region.
So we have a totally different topic question now, and if you have no opinion on this, you can give that as an answer. Um, what is your opinion about zoning and housing policies? And if you have an opinion, what do you think can be done at the federal level to address the issues surrounding that?
Yeah. I do have an opinion on this. So, first of all, I would say we need a ton more housing. We have tremendous housing affordability challenges, and it's primarily a supply side problem. We have inadequate housing supply. We need somewhere between, depending upon what economic analysis you look at, somewhere between 7 million and 12 million additional housing units constructed to meet the demand. And so one thing we're not growing is land. And so having zoning that enables density is important. Uh, I feel so strongly about that. I've worked on this issue. I'm the lead sponsor of a bill called the Yes in My Backyard Act, which looks at when communities are going after federal dollars through CDBG, through the Community Development Block Grant Program. At least having some reporting related to what kind of inclusionary zoning that they have, and some other questions around barriers to affordable housing development, so that we're removing some of those barriers and seeing more affordable housing construction. I think that makes a lot of sense. And we've been working with the Financial Services Committee in hopes of seeing that bill get moving.
That's great. Yeah, now that you did say that, you reminded me that you are leading the YIMBY Act. So that's my bad for forgetting that you're one of the leaders on that one.
You bet.
And it's more impressive as well that you're leading that bill despite the fact that you don't represent a major metropolis of a city. Like, you believe even in the suburbs and the smaller cities like Tacoma that you represent, that housing shortages are a big deal there too, and that we need to have zoning reforms not only in big cities but in communities like yours.
There's not a community I represent that hasn't struggled with housing affordability. Literally and for some communities, there are different reasons. If you're down in Aberdeen, Washington, which is where Kurt Cobain was from Nirvana, one of their challenges is 90% of the properties in the floodplain. And so until we address the flooding issues, it's really hard to drive new housing development or new economic development for that matter. For what it's worth, that's part of the Recompete Act. Part of the reason I sponsored that Recompete Act is to provide flexible long-term support to communities, recognizing that different communities have different needs, and so that the federal policy response needs to have the flexibility to recognize that we can't have a one-size-fits-all approach.
What are your thoughts on using tariffs or banning goods from regions where there are human rights abuses? Is this a good response? Is this a good use of trade policy?
Well, here's what I would say. I think it's valuable to recognize that we have a lot of tools in our foreign policy toolbox. And to me, one of the challenges of the 21st century is figuring out what tools to use in what circumstance. We have economic tools in our foreign policy toolbox. Trade is one of them. And there are times that we have used those tools to try to drive policy outcomes outside of just pure economic outcomes, to try to address human rights abuses. Sanctions is another economic policy where you've seen the United States levy sanctions against countries that have not shared our values, or where there were concerns about not just threats, but threats to the global order or threats to human rights. Diplomacy is another tool in our foreign policy toolbox. And so, and the military, when things get really bad, is a tool in our policy toolbox. And so I think about this foreign policy toolbox. And one of the concerns I had about the last administration is we seem to have a president who is very quick to want to go to that last one, right? To look at, to threaten the use of military force. And I think we have to be far more thoughtful about that. And so I think we have an administration now that is looking at how we thoughtfully use those policy tools. You saw, for example, the announcement around the Olympics in China. So that where we have concerns and Congress has taken action in other instances, looking at potentially sanctions or the use of trade policy to try to prevent countries from threatening the global order or from threatening human rights. And I think that makes sense.
Back to silly questions. Who would have Baby Yoda voted for in the 2020 presidential primary?
I don't know that I can answer that. I don't have he doesn't say much. So, gosh, can we come back to that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't have like a
I feel like
pitch that one on.
I feel like the only answer I can and should give is Governor Jay Inslee.
Fair enough.
Yeah, my governor, because that's that feels like the only right answer.
Let's scroll through the other questions. Lots of Star Wars questions, and I won't belabor you with all of them.
Listen, I'm game for anything. I still feel bad that I canceled last week because of votes. So, if people have a question, I'm ready.
Let's see here. Here's a very specific question. And again, I don't know if you have an answer for this one, but are you concerned about the effect of threatened Canadian, Mexican retaliatory tariffs in response to the Build Back Better EV credit?
We'll see. I mean, I am supportive of what was in the bill. I think there's value in making investments in expanding the use of electric vehicles. We know that we've got to combat the climate crisis, and one of the large contributors to the climate crisis is the stuff that comes out of our tailpipes. And so expanding the use of electric vehicles, I think, is smart policy, and doing it in a way that supports good American union jobs also makes good sense to me. Now, having said that, I know that some of our trade partners are concerned about that, and I know that the Biden administration is engaging with our trading partners to see if there's a way to thread that needle in a way that gets us where we need to go in terms of supporting domestic job growth and addressing the climate challenge, but doing so in a way that doesn't lead to more trade disputes.
Given that you represent a district with 19 ports, how do you feel personally about the Jones Act and the effect that it has on your constituents and businesses in your district?
I support the Jones Act.
How come? What's your reasoning behind that?
I support domestic maritime. I think it's important to build domestic maritime, and I think it's a sound policy for doing that. So I've been a strong supporter of the Jones Act since I've been in this job.
I know there's also a very strong national security argument for the Jones Act that people have mentioned before, sure, that the fact that we build them in our own country is important, especially in times of conflict.
Absolutely.
Let's see here. Someone just wanted to let you know that their question was answered incredibly well, and they wanted to thank you for such a wonderful answer.
They wanted to know the Star Wars question. I'm sure that was the one I nailed for them.
Well, the question was, and this might be a controversial answer, how do you feel about the sequel movies that came out recently?
I mean, here's what I would say. Not as good as the original trilogy, but I would still rather watch a Star Wars movie than probably anything else.
If you had to pick a prequel or a sequel to watch all three in a row, which would it be?
I think the sequels.
Really? All right.
Yeah, I think so.
I really grew up on the prequels, so they have this like weird nostalgia in my head that
I
like
think
in
number
retrospect
three
is
is
unfounded
I
because
think
they're
number
like,
three is great. I think number three is great, but
okay,
like one and two are not as like if I look at what I've rewatched the most, four, five, six are like so far ahead of everything else. Um, and then three probably honestly, you know what you didn't ask? Rogue One. Rogue One is, I think, underrated. I love Rogue One.
someone was in the chat saying how great Rogue One was. It wasn't phrased as a question, but there you go. You have a Rogue One supporter in the chat who is championing its how good it is.
I hope
Uh,
everyone's prepared to watch the Book of Boba Fett on Disney Plus after you watch all 8 hours of the Beatles documentary. So
um, someone asked, and this isn't Disney related. How do you feel about nuclear power?
so my state and my district has sort of a complicated relationship with nuclear power. We have nuclear power. We also are dealing with the cleanup at Hanford,
Mm-hmm.
which is you know tens of billions of dollars nuclear waste cleanup project. So I have generally been someone who um, believes that we need to have um, sort of a broad portfolio of energy sources. I've also generally believed that if we can do it in a safe way, that nuclear provides a good sort of bridge to some of the other and a base load for some of the other renewable energy sources that we have. Um, we just actually did a call with Energy Northwest last week, and one of the things I sort of probed them about as we look at new nuclear investments is trying to lower my constituents' blood pressure around some of the safety concerns and the questions around what you do with the waste. So
Mm-hmm.
those are, I think, obviously, sort of vitally important pieces of the puzzle. Um, uh, but I recognize if we're going to get to net zero, and we need to from a uh, uh, standpoint of prevention of the climate crisis, then nuclear is likely to remain a piece of the puzzle.
On the topic of environmental and like green policy, someone asked, um, how do you believe that we should be addressing emission concerns surrounding trade on container ships? They're notoriously huge polluters. Do you think that the federal government should have any role in directing trade to be greener, more environmentally friendly?
It's a fair question. I think oftentimes where you've seen improvements in emissions, it's when the federal government has played either has had a carrot or stick role. You've certainly seen that with regard to automobile emissions. Thankfully, and I give credit to a lot of the major shipping lines, they're moving toward greener fuels, trying to reduce the emissions related to that, frankly, without having a big stick coming from the federal government. But I think that is a legitimate concern. Again, trade's going to happen, and to the degree that it can happen in a way that reduces our carbon footprint, I think that's very important. You've seen the state of Washington driving a lot of innovation on that. Our shipbuilding industry is looking at um, building ships that can handle alternative fuels, and have really been on the front lines of this. Even hell, our state ferry system is now quickly migrating to an electric fleet. That's complicated in terms of crossing the Pacific, but you're seeing a lot of innovation happen in our state around vessel construction in a way to reduce emissions.
That's good to hear. And I didn't realize that that your area was starting to electrify its ferry service. You guys probably are like the biggest users of ferries in the country, so it's good to hear that
It's our
your
marine
area is
highways.
leading the charge.
It's absolutely our marine highways, and we're trying to do it in a way that again, just recognizing that, and my district's a big part of this, right? The we have a ton of ferry commuters, and our constituents are really excited about the fact that the state of Washington's showing leadership in trying to reduce its emissions, and that's a real testament to Baby Yoda's favorite candidate for president, Jay Inslee. Our governor has done an extraordinary job on that,
um,
with some help from the federal government too.
I'm sure the infrastructure bill will have some money for further electrifying the Washington State's ferry fleet.
Indeed.
Um, On the topic of Washington, I think this will be our last question as well. So I'm sorry to those who we weren't able to get to their questions. Um, I'm based on the context of the message. I'm guessing Washington is a big producer of apples. What is your favorite apple variety?
Oh my gosh. It's so funny. We were just talking about this because I am um gosh, it's so hard because like that's like asking a Washingtonian their favorite apple is like asking a parent your favorite child. We love them all. Like my family goes apple picking. Like
Mm-hmm.
we do all of this, and my wife makes the best apple pies ever. I'm more of a red guy than a green guy.
Okay.
Washington State University has been leading a bunch of like cool innovation. This is super nerdy, so apologies, but
Oh,
you
please.
know
This is
they
perfect.
they they do amazing agricultural research and like produce like new types of apples that they've like cracked the code on so many things. Um, gosh, which is my favorite? Can I just say all of them? I mean, I don't want to choose a favorite child.
That's fine. I mean, every like different apples have different roles. Some are good for baking, some are good for eating. So like that's a perfectly reasonable answer.
Okay.
Especially as
I
a
feel like
native
I've been
Washingtonian.
straightforward with every one of your questions, and I dodged the last one about my favorite apple. But I really don't have a favorite. If I carried my computer into my kitchen, you would see five different kinds of apples. I'm not kidding. So, um,
We obviously ask very hard pressing questions on these streams. We
exactly.
save the hardest
You ended
questions
on
for
the
last.
toughest. Yeah, exactly, exactly. We really ramped this up. So.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to come join us. I'm glad we could make this happen, especially after votes blew up our event last week. And this was just wonderful, especially the fact that you're able to bounce seamlessly between trade policy and supply chains and Star Wars and apples all within an hour-long event.
All goes with the
Kudos to you.
territory. Well, let me just say thanks for having me, and for those who watched, listen. I know this last year has been really challenging for everybody, and I wish everybody a happy and hopefully restful holiday season. Thanks for caring. I know sometimes it's difficult to watch um, the federal government in action. That's both in action and inaction. But it really does matter. The work that we're doing, the work that the Biden administration's doing, the work that the New Democrat coalition and House Democrats are doing, um, is really important as we try to get to a new normal that make sure that we're not leaving people behind and not leaving communities behind, and making government work better for the people we represent. So for all of you who were willing to hang out with me on Zoom for an hour, thanks for caring enough about your country to do that, and we'll keep working.
That's a perfect way to end it. Well, Derek, you're welcome back anytime, and thank you again for doing this. This is a great conversation.
Thanks, Colin. Take care, everybody.
Bye bye. All right, that was a wonderful conversation. Um, it's always great when we do these kinds of things, and you can you go from like these like very standard questions about like trade policy and whatnot, and then like halfway through it gets really fun because then you can get like really relaxed and start talking about Star Wars or whatnot. I'd like to apologize. I don't know if anyone noticed. We had a background up like for 15 minutes of this event, and then it collapsed like 15 minutes in. I just heard this crashing noise, and I turn around. I'm like, oh crap. It used to hang from the ceiling, and then I had to do some like duct tape shimmying just before the event to like hide that messy shelf. Clearly that didn't work because then it just fell over. So sorry for having to look at the messy equipment shelf during this event. But thank you all for like coming, for asking good questions, for being mostly respectful. I saw a few of you though, nasty questions. And it was great. I love like bringing a member of Congress on and just like letting them know that like this is a community of people who support them, want to hear what they're talking about, are open to hearing different ideas, and having conversations about super wonky stuff because elected officials rarely get the opportunity to nerd out about Star Wars or the Jones Act. And hey, we're a place that we can have those conversations. Colin, plug my bug stream. I have no idea what that means. Let's see. Hey, Bastiat. Thanks. And thanks for joining. I always appreciate your presence on these kinds of things. You're our all-star, and we all aspire to be as good of a streamer as you. But yes, you should definitely follow Derek on Twitter. He has a great track. I'm losing my words. He has a great track record in Congress, and the fact that he is a New Dem chair emeritus is amazing and makes him one of us for sure. So follow him on Twitter. Let's see who else we got here in the chat. So I don't know what your bug stream is. Tobin, I do want to apologize for not shilling your poster, but I did not want to accidentally reveal a member of Congress's address on a stream. But let's talk offline after this, and we'll figure something out. Because it's pretty clear that Derek is a big fan of the child tax credit. So we'll talk and we'll figure something out. Play the seal video. We will play the seal video in just a moment. We'll end the stream on the seal video. Oh, I have to eat bugs on stream because the subreddit raised 100K for charity. What bugs are you eating? Jesus freaking Christ, Jeremiah. That's so bad. I'm not a part of that, thankfully. Seals, bug stream, eat scorpions. Jeremiah eats cicada tacos, roaches. Yeah, Jeremiah, you have to go to one of those like Japanese hotel pods and eat the bug in one of those Japanese hotel pods so that you are living in a pod and eating bugs at the same time. A national conservative's worst nightmare. Jen Banham said, I messaged all my congressional representatives about the Jones Act, and not a single one supported ending it. I mean, Washington State, as far as I'm aware, is a big shipbuilding community. So for them, it's something that their constituents care about. And the fact that the Jones Act exists delivers a lot of jobs to their constituents. So you kind of have to detach the economic policy from the constituent services political aspect of it, because it delivers results to Derek's constituents, and at its core, delivering for them is why he does this job, and that's why he's been reelected as many times as he has. He's been in Congress for almost a decade now, which is wild. All right, I don't see much more productive stuff in chat, so I'm going to say again, thank you all so much for joining this, for great questions, for showing up at 8 p.m. or 5 p.m. or 6 or 7, depending where you are in the country. Means a lot. And I hope you'll join us for our next congressional stream, which I'm sure will happen in the next couple of months. I do want to give a shout out, though, quickly to our wonderful organizing director, Marcos Butler, who did a fantastic job with coordinating this event and communication and making it all happen. And he will be the reason in the future if we have more of these events. So kudos to him. And of course, as always, thanks for Jeremiah for being in the chat, helping to calm all of the people who are getting sometimes angry at certain things. And obviously, we wouldn't be doing these Twitch streams if he was also not doing these Twitch streams from his laptop in New York City. So I'm going to open up the links that are in chat. I have the bug video queued up, not the bug video, the seal video queued up. And then we'll wrap this up. And then I'll be able to get home and go to bed. So grossest bugs. Ooh. Oh, this is not what I expected. Okay. No thanks. Let me queue up this seal video to wrap up this wonderful stream. There we go. I'll play it one more time because apparently it wasn't featured prominently enough for you all. So I will do it one more time. Oh. I've never seen this one before. On that note, thank you all again for joining the stream tonight. I hope you'll join us next time for our next congressional event or bug eating stream with Jeremiah.